Hi, I'm J.C. Holman. This is the Anarcha Archive. Today, we're going to consider one of the most baffling mysteries in the story of Anarcha and J. Marion Sims. That means considering the life of Dr. Nathan Bozeman, who worked as Sims' assistant in Alabama and went on to become Sims' greatest critic. The mystery is that for 170 years, after Sims claimed to have cured Anarcha, all of the women who were part of his earliest fistula experiments disappeared. They just vanished. Sims famously invited many doctors and medical students to observe his initial experiments. Many of those doctors went on to publish articles, and some even spoke about their time knowing Sims, but none of them ever said a word about having met Anarcha, Lucy, Betsy, or any of his initial group of experimental subjects. And it gets weirder from there. Whoa, 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 whoa. This is Dr. Nathan Bozeman. He grew up in Alabama, in Autauga County, just to the north of Montgomery. But he went to medical school in Kentucky. He was an early adopter of the use of chloroform as an anesthetic. By his own account, Bozeman returned to Montgomery in June 1849 to begin to practice medicine. He more or less immediately began to work as Sims' assistant. Recall that Sims claimed to have cured Anarcha in May or June of 1849. He said that over the next several weeks, he cured the remainder of the enslaved women in his backyard clinic. So Bozeman arrives in early 1849, and he begins to work for Sims. Anarcha is cured a couple of months later, and the remainder of Sims' experimental subjects are cured in the weeks to come. I'm using scare quotes here because we'll be seeing soon enough that Sims' cures were not what he said they were. But for right now, I have a different question. If Bozeman arrived in June and Sims was still experimenting on Anarcha or the others at that time, shouldn't Bozeman have seen them? He didn't. Many years later, in 1884, long after Sims and Bozeman began a lifelong feud that I'll talk about in a later video, Bozeman published a full account of the procedure he learned from Sims. It was a takedown, published shortly after Sims died. In it, Bozeman details all of Sims' cases, including Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. Bozeman suggests that because they were cured, their fistula must have been easy cases. And that's completely wrong. We know because Sims' autobiography, which was never finished and was published posthumously just a year after Bozeman's article appeared, offered extensive details never before seen about the condition and treatment of Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. Bozeman said these cases had been easy, but they weren't. He didn't want to admit it, but he'd never seen Sims' earliest claims to success. To be clear, if Bozeman had seen Anarcha, he most certainly would have made that apparent. What Bozeman does provide is the names of a number of other enslaved women, Anne, Lavinia, Delia, and others, that Sims experimented on after 1849. These women, however, were not part of Sims' initial group of experimental subjects. What all this means is that the women and the cure at the center of the story of the birth of modern women's health is a complete mystery. What happened to her? Where did Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy go after 1849? That's the story we'll begin to tell in our next video. Whoa, 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 whoa.